The big reason I do these must start and sit videos late in the week is because we get plenty of injury updates by then. We already have some inactive players declared already, so it gives me time to update my rankings and run through every single matchup to find the must start and sit options per matchup. So that's exactly what we're doing today, finding the must start and sit wide receivers in week 2 fantasy football by going through every matchup. So make sure to go down there and drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel to show your support, because I'm one of the only fantasy YouTubers working on a Saturday. So dropping down to our first matchup right here is the San Francisco 49ers at the Minnesota Vikings here. Now, obviously, Justin Jefferson is still a must-start guy. I've kind of said a little bit about why I'm uneasy on this matchup. I do think it is a negative matchup for Justin Jefferson because I do think that the 49ers defense will be able to shut down Sam Darnold. They know his tendencies, they know what he's good at, they know what he's not good at, because Sam Darnold was a 49er last year. But of course, Justin Jefferson is an elite player who would cost a lot to get in drafts, so you do not sit him. And then Deebo Samuel, I think Deebo Samuel right now is such a great fantasy asset without Christian McCaffrey. I think in order of importance on this offense, it goes Christian McCaffrey, then Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel is going to be a nightmare, I think, for the next several weeks for anybody playing you if you have Deebo Samuel. So I think Deebo Samuel is a locked and loaded must-start right now. Definitely better than Brandon Ayuk, and I do think that Juwan Jennings is a good deep play. Brandon Ayuk, of course, last week he had every opportunity. He just looked rusty, which is understandable, right? Like, he held out basically the entire summer. He held out really all off-season camp because he was looking for a new deal. Well, obviously he gets this new deal and then comes back and looks pretty bad last Monday night. So hopefully he can get it back together. I have confidence that he will, and because they paid him, they're going to continue to try to get him the ball. So I think Ayuk is going to be fine, and this could be a good jump start matchup for Brandon Ayuk. And then Juwan Jennings, I think that he's a good deep flex option because he will have importance to the offense, especially if Brandon Ayuk falters. They'll probably use Juwan Jennings. And I mean, over the years, historically, the 49ers have liked to use Juwan Jennings. So I do think Juwan Jennings is not anybody you want to play in like a 12-team league. But if you're in an 18-team league or a 16-team league, Juwan Jennings has some merit here. And then we're going to go ahead, we're going to sit Brandon Powell and Jalen Naylor because Jordan Addison is out. And I don't think that, again, in this tough matchup, it's going to be worth playing either one of those guys. The Seattle Seahawks at the New England Patriots is our next matchup here. There's not a single must-start here to me. DK Metcalf is a high-end flex option, obviously, because he's going to have the big play upside. Last week was what it was, right? Like, I think last week was what it was because he was on Pat Surtain. And I said it before the week, and I got a lot of pushback for not having DK inside the top 30. He's back in there this week, but he's still not a must-start guy because I don't trust the Seahawks offense personally. And I do think the New England Patriots, their defense is the strength of that team. It's definitely not their offense, which is why you can't play Jalen Polk or Demario Douglas in this game because Jacoby Brissett is throwing less than 200 yards. So there's just not enough upside here against a strong defense in Seattle. Now, Tyler Lockett, I would prefer to start him over Jack Smith-Njigba, which kills me to say. I'm a big Jack Smith-Njigba guy, but based on usage last week, what can you really expect him to do in an offense that is probably not going to throw for a ton of yards this week? He's flexible. Probably in deeper leagues, I would play Jack Smith-Njigba. I still think he has talent, and he could hit a big game, but based on usage, Tyler Lockett's the better flex option here. The New York Giants at the Washington Commanders is our next matchup here. And Malik Neighbors, I do believe, is a must-start this week. If you looked at Malik Neighbors' usage last week, he was really efficient on every target that he had. And last week, he played a tougher matchup against the Minnesota Vikings. The Washington Commanders is like the perfect spark plug for Malik Neighbors to come out and have a massive game. And he's not a top 15 wide receiver for me in rankings this week, but I'm definitely trying to get him in my lineup because I do think that the matchup here just presents so much big play upside for him to hit like a 2-touchdown week. So Malik Neighbors is definitely a guy I would advise to start 9 out of 10 times probably. Terry McLaurin is flexible, but a mid-tier option. I mean, just based on the fact that he's a wide receiver 1 is going to keep him in flexible territory. But this guy it's a problem. It's a big problem for sure. And I don't think that this Giants matchup is exactly terrible. I don't think it's exactly great. So unless Jaden Daniels and him could find some chemistry, Terry McLaurin's going to stay in like mid-tier flex territory. Wan'Dale Robinson is a decent, deeper flex play. And even if you're in a full PPR league, like 12 or 14 man, I can understand going with Wan'Dale if you have a couple injuries. Like if you have an injury to Jordan Addison or T. Higgins, I can understand going with a guy like Wan'Dale. Wan'Dale had 9 targets last week. I mean, he's important to the offense, and I do think he will have a role carved out, like kind of in the Zay Flowers type of deal, where it's a lot of shorter routes and a lot of, he's a twitchier guy, so he'll find some open space sometimes. But again, this offense is just lower upside, so I feel already uncomfortable and weird putting 2 Giants wide receivers as playable. And then I wouldn't personally play another Commanders receiver. I think Zacchaeus, Luke McCaffrey, Diami Brown, they're all guys that I'm going to sit until further notice. The Los Angeles Chargers at the Carolina Panthers this week. I think Ladd McConkey is the best play, but he's not a must-start just yet. I think if he has a really good game, he could become a must-start guy within the next 2 weeks. Ladd McConkey's just, I think, going to be in a game script where the Chargers are going to run it down their throat. I mean, the Panthers, they can't stop it. They can't stop the run, and the Chargers prefer to run anyways. So it's like you don't really have a ton of upside in the passing game when you're just trying to run the ball down their throat. I think that it's clear Ladd McConkey is and will continue to be the number 1 guy in this Chargers wide receiver room. So just based on that and based on the quarterback and based on the matchup, I do think it's a flexible play and is in a different tier than Deontay. Deontay is, he's the best of the bunch in Carolina, but I don't think that you can really flex Deontay Johnson this week. I think Xavier Legette is flexible in really deep leagues, but I'm not going out there and telling anybody to start Xavier Legette over Deontay Johnson or Ladd McConkey. 9 out of 10 times, I probably won't tell you to play Xavier Legette. But if you are desperate, if you're in that Wan'Dale Robinson situation where you're trying to decide between him and Wan'Dale, I would probably say you could play Wan'Dale over Legette, but you can play Legette in certain situations. And you go ahead, you sit everybody else. The one guy I say keep an eye on is Quentin Johnston. Johnston is a guy to keep your eye on. This guy is being used as he should have been last year and as he was in college, which is to get him on a lot of crossing routes to open up his potential to get yards after the catch. That's what Quentin Johnston had exceeded at in college, and the Chargers kind of seemed to figure that out in week 1. So I think that he put such a bad taste in people's mouth last year. I think it's time to look at him, but definitely don't start him this week. I'm not telling you to start him. Josh Palmer, he's my least favorite of the bunch. I don't think he has any merit to start, especially since he's got a questionable tag and may not play this weekend. The New Orleans Saints at the Dallas Cowboys is our next matchup. You play CeeDee Lamb, no reason to discuss it. Chris Olave, I still think is a must start. I think that 8 times out of 10, 80% of the time, I would advise you starting Olave. If you had like a decision with Rashee Rice and him, Rashee Rice is the better option. If you have a decision between Drake London and Olave, I would still go Olave. Because the reality is that last week, that game script was so run heavy for the Saints because they didn't have to throw later on. Like they were up by like 17 by the end of the first quarter. That game was over before it even started. So they just didn't need Olave, and they hit the big play with Rashid Shaheed early, and then hit a couple tight end zone touchdown throws, red zone. So like Olave is going to be much more needed in this Cowboys game. I'm very confident that Olave has a bounce back game this week. Rashid Shaheed is flexible because he does have the big play upside. That's the only reason. There's going to be times where Rashid Shaheed, probably more often than not, doesn't do anything for you. He probably they don't hit on the big play. And this is a week where I think it's possible that could happen. But based on the upside that he has with big plays, and Carr does throw a pretty good deep ball, I will say that Rashid Shaheed is flexible this week. And then I think that Brandon Cooks, I think that he's flexible, but I would prefer Rashid Shaheed over Brandon Cooks. I don't think Brandon Cooks sustains that level of involvement and that level of consistency as the year goes on. And then Jalen Tolbert, you go ahead and sit him. I just need to see a little bit more first because Brandon Cooks looks like the number 2 right now. There's a lot of uncertainties in this matchup, but I'll tell you what's not an uncertainty. CeeDee Lamb getting more than half a yard against the New Orleans Saints this week. That's his line on Underdog right now. You need to take advantage of it. Go down in the comments, use that link in the comments below, and when you use code FFED to deposit $10 on Underdog, they'll match your first deposit 50% up to $1,000 in bonus cash. and you'll be able to take advantage, hit the higher on that CeeDee Lamb line. So go down there, use the link in the comments, and use code FFN to play that CeeDee Lamb line. Now, jumping down to our next matchup, the Indianapolis Colts at the Green Bay Packers here. Michael Pittman is still a start. And the reason why is because target share was all his. He had like a 45% target share last week against the Houston Texans. That's obviously a tough matchup when you're going up against Derek Stingley. Now this week, Jair Alexander is his opportunity. So it's not worse, I don't think. It's maybe a little bit better, but it's still going to be tough. But based on targets alone, he's getting the opportunity. He just needs to be able to connect. And I think that with another week of Anthony Richardson, they will find their way because they're not all of a sudden going to stop using Michael Pittman. It's not all of a sudden going to be Alec Pierce, who we'll get to in a minute. Michael Pittman, he's in a similar situation as Olave, where 8 times out of 10, I think that Michael Pittman is going to be a guy that I would tell you to start. Jaden Reed remains a high-end flex option. Not remains, he becomes a high-end flex option. I think that Jaden Reed, if Jordan Love is playing, which apparently he still has a chance to play, I don't think he's going to, and that's the assumption I'm operating under, is that Jaden Reed is playing with Malik Willis, which inevitably likely lowers his ceiling. That's just the problem here. Him and Love have a great connection, and I don't see that. I don't see with anybody with Malik Willis. So I think that just because of the Malik Willis factor, you have to factor in just a little bit of a ceiling drop, while his floor is still good because he is that number one option. And I don't think you can play anybody else in this matchup. I think Watson, you don't play him with Malik Willis. You don't play Romeo Doubs. You don't play Dontavian Wicks. And I don't think you can play Josh Downs or Alec Pierce yet. Josh Downs is still injured, so we don't even know if he's going to play for certain. And I think that with Alec Pierce, that's a big play guy who hits on it every couple games of the year. I mean, that's really what I've seen throughout Alec Pierce's career. So I've gotten a couple questions on it this week. I'm not an Alec Pierce guy. I think you'll see him come out and do what he's always done, which is really bust for fantasy teams that end up putting him in the lineup because of a big game once in a while. The Cleveland Browns are at the Jacksonville Jaguars this week, taking on our next matchup here, and there's nobody that's a must start. I mean, I don't trust either receiving core, to be honest with you. The only guy I trust the most is Amari Cooper. I mean, Amari Cooper did have 9 targets last week, which is obviously meaning something. Sort of a Michael Pittman Jr. thing where they just didn't connect. Now, I have more faith in Pittman's quarterback, Anthony Richardson, than I do in Deshaun Watson, who I have been not shy about at all this week. Deshaun Watson is atrocious. He's an embarrassment for the league. I, as a Steelers fan, actually feel bad for Browns fans right now because you are trapped with Deshaun Watson. That being said, I do think that this matchup is good for Amari Cooper. And based on 9 targets and with David Njoku out in this game, I think there will be an even more importance being thrust onto Amari Cooper. I think that's where we are with Amari Cooper. So based on target share, he remains flexible with an atrocious quarterback. And then Christian Kirk, I think that Christian Kirk is the most flexible out of the Jacksonville group because he is more of a target guy than Brian Thomas Jr. We could easily see that flip here soon. I think Christian Kirk is actually losing steam, and he's not the same player. Brian Thomas Jr. is very close to Christian Kirk's flexible tier. I have not made it shy. I'm not big on Brian Thomas Jr. just yet. I'm not bought into the hype. I'm just not there with everybody else. I think that he's a guy who's going to hit on big plays, but is not crispy enough on his routes to get a big enough target share in this offense. Maybe we'll see him develop into that as the season goes, but based on what I saw last week and based on the matchup this week, I still would prefer to play Christian Kirk. And then I would go ahead and sit Gabe Davis, Jerry Jeudy. Gabe Davis is what he is. Like, he'll get a couple targets. I just don't think he's going to be able to really do anything with it against the Cleveland Browns defense. And then I also think Jerry Jeudy is never a guy that I would tell you guys to start. It would take a lot, and we're not there yet. The New York Jets at the Tennessee Titans this week. Garrett Wilson's obviously a must start. You don't sit Garrett Wilson even though he's taking on L'Jarius Sneed. That's a tough matchup. That is definitely a tough matchup that you need to be aware of, but you still need to play Garrett Wilson in. I think that Calvin Ridley is the best flexible guy and the best play on the Tennessee Titans side of the ball, because I think that Calvin Ridley he'll hit on big plays every once in a while, and based on Levis's arm, inconsistent, but can hit on big plays. So there will always be a definite intention on getting Calvin Ridley the ball, but this matchup is not good. I mean, the matchup against Sauce Gardner, no bueno. That's for sure. Lazard is flexible based on what he did last week. I mean, that's Aaron Rodgers' guy from Green Bay. He wants to throw to Allen Lazard in certain times. So Lazard is definitely flexible. I wouldn't say I would play him over Ridley, but he's probably in that Christian Kirk, Brian Thomas Jr. tier for me. So I think that you could play Allen Lazard if you prefer it. And I do think that this matchup with Garrett Wilson facing a lot of L'Jarius Sneed could open up opportunities for Lazard. And then I would sit Tyler Boyd, I would sit DeAndre Hopkins and Mike Williams. Tyler Boyd, I need to see it first. Hopkins, I need to see more first. And then with Mike Williams, he needs to get on the field more. And then the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Detroit Lions, our next matchup. Obvious two must-starts. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Mike Evans. No reason to really talk about it. Chris Godwin, I'm sure some people are going to be like, why is he not a must-start? I am not exactly the most pro Chris Godwin, so last week caught me by surprise. And I'm acknowledging that I was probably wrong on Chris Godwin. I think I need to see just a little bit more, again, from him to put him in must-start territory. Now, I think based on the trajectory, it's looking good. And Chris Godwin could get into must-start territory as soon as next week. And I'm sure there's other channels that do have him as must-start. Either way, a lot of times I'm going to tell you to play Chris Godwin this week. Jameson Williams, dealing with an injury. I mean, dealing with that ankle injury, I think he suffered last Sunday night. So I would say that he looks like he's going to play. And if that's the case, you could definitely play Jameson. He's more in that Brian Thomas Jr., Kirk, Allen Lazard tier for me, though. I'm not bought in yet with Jameson Williams. I've seen him for too many years be very streaky and inconsistent. And this was the first time I've really seen a massive level of involvement in this offense. Does it keep up? It might, but I'm not there yet. But I think he's definitely playable. That's for certain. Then you sit everybody else. But keep an eye on Jalen McMillan. Keep an eye on him. The Las Vegas Raiders at the Baltimore Ravens this week. And nobody's a must start. I mean, Davante Adams is a high-end flex option. I've been saying it all offseason with Davante Adams. It's a bad situation for him. I mean, it's a really bad situation. Bad quarterback play. He's clearly unhappy. And the matchup against the Ravens is not good. So Davante's a high-end flex because he's going to get the targets and he's a great player still. But I don't love this situation at all. And Zay's always going to be flexible. At the very least because he's so clearly the number one wide receiver in this offense. But there's obviously an emphasis always from Lamar Jackson to get the ball to tight ends. That's just how Lamar plays the game. So Zay is just at the very minimum flexible and probably doesn't have the highest ceiling any week because he just doesn't see a ton of downfield targets. Now, he did see a couple last week, and he could have hit on a big play if he didn't get draped by a corner, but I do think that Zay Flowers is ultimately a guy I wouldn't trust over a guy like Davante Adams. And then Jacoby Myers, Rashad Bateman, you go ahead and you sit him. Jacoby Myers may be flexible sometimes, not this week against the Ravens though. The Los Angeles Rams at the Arizona Cardinals. Cooper Kupp, that's your must start. That's to the extent of it. 21 targets last week. I mean, this guy is clearly the number one without Puka Nacua there. And then Marvin Harris Jr. is it's a high-end flex option. I put him in the same tier almost as Olave. He's kind of in a really high-end flex option, maybe similar to DK Metcalf at the beginning of this video. I think that Marvin Harris Jr. will get it going because, like I said on the buy low video this week, you can't convince me that their number one wide receiver long season is going to be Greg Dortch or Michael Wilson. And you can't convince me Trey McBride out-targets Marvin Harris Jr. this year. They spent too much draft capital on the dude, and he's a good player. So Marvin Harrison Jr. just a bad week one. He's a rookie. I think he'll be fine. And then Tyler Johnson is my favorite receiver in the Rams room outside of Cooper Kupp. Last week, he hit on the big plays. He also got more targets than that. Demarcus Robinson, he's been in this league for a while. He's got the veteran quality, but he just doesn't look fantastic. So I think he's flexible because it could easily be him over Tyler Johnson, my hunch is that it's going to be Tyler Johnson. And based on last week, Greg Dortch is definitely flexible because he very well might lead the team in targets again. While I don't think it'll happen long season, maybe he does it again in week 2. And then Michael Wilson, if you have him, you sit him right now. The next matchup, the Cincinnati Bengals at the Kansas City Chiefs. You start your obvious players. Jamar Chase was a little disappointing last week. That's a buy low opportunity. They're going to be fine. May not be this week that they get it going. I think that I have a pipe dream that they do get it going because I want to see a good game because Burrow's the only quarterback who's beaten Mahomes in big spots. So I think Jamar Chase, if they do, is going to be obviously the main focal point for Joe Burrow to win. Rashee Rice is a locked and loaded must start every week. 99% of the time, I'm telling you to play Rashee Rice. Xavier Worthy is in pretty high-end flex territory. I mean, last week, obviously, not a ton of work, but on the work, he was so freaking good. I mean, that's what I think is going to happen is that they're just going to continue to increase what he does because Hollywood's not a threat. Let's get that out of the way. The dude's on IR now. And just based on what he did in week 1, how can you say that they won't increase his workload? In a game that very well might be closer than people think and higher scoring than people think. So I think Xavier Worthy is going to be a guy that's going to be, at the minimum, a mid-tier flex option. And I think he's just going to continue to improve and increase his workload in this offense. And then Andre Isovas, I think he's definitely flexible based on matchup and based on no T. Higgins, but not a guy I'm looking to play most of the time. I would play Brian Thomas Jr., I would play Tyler Johnson over him, I would play Christian Kirk over him. He's not in that tier for me. And then you obviously sit Justin Watson and T. Higgins in this matchup. The Pittsburgh Steelers at the Denver Broncos this week. George Pickens, Cortland Sutton, they're the best options and they're only flexible. They're like not even really high-end flex guys. Pickens is going to have his hands full. Pat Surtain just locked down DK last week. Most people would say that George Pickens is not a better player than DK, although I do think I could make an argument for it personally. But this week against them and with Justin Fields at quarterback, I don't trust Pickens this week. He's a flex option because he's the number 1, but it's going to be a rough week on Pat Surtain. And then Sutton here, last week was just not encouraging with Bo Nix. And I think that Bo Nix will struggle again versus the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. And Sutton is just not there yet. Unless Sutton starts getting touchdowns, very seldomly will I say that he's more than a mid-tier flex option. Marvin Mims Jr., that's a guy, I mean, you cannot trust right now. And then Josh Reynolds, borderline on flex territory. I'm not there quite yet because, again, I don't trust the Denver options in this game against the Steelers. The Chicago Bears at the Houston Texans. Sunday night matchup, you play your top wide receivers. Nico Collins, no question, no need to discuss. DJ Moore becomes even more valuable if Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze both miss this game, which it looks like they both might be trending to miss. Keenan Allen didn't practice at all this week, and I don't think Rome practiced at all either. So I would say Keenan, if he plays, is flexible because he did lead the team in targets last week with 11. Now, if he doesn't play, DJ Moore, either way, is a must-start guy. But if neither Keenan or Rome Odunze don't play, that DJ Moore's upside in this matchup is ridiculously high because of necessity. And because he's a great player, just needs to connect with Caleb Williams. And it may not happen this week, but I do think that DJ Moore is, based on opportunities, must start either way. Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell, Keenan Allen, they're all flexible. Both the Houston wide receivers are more flexible than Keenan Allen, but Keenan Allen is definitely going to be flexible if he plays based on the targets last week. Now, obviously, unless we get news before noon tomorrow, noon Central Time, that whether Keenan Allen's playing or not, you're probably going to have to sit him because he is the Sunday night game. But with the two Houston wide receivers, definitely good flex options this week. And then the Atlanta Falcons at the Philadelphia Eagles this week. Now, Devonta Smith is locked and loaded either way. A.J. Brown came down with a hamstring injury on Friday's practice. This is, again, the reason why these videos are important to do on Saturdays. Because A.J. Brown playing on Monday night, he came down with a hamstring injury during practice on Friday. And I got an alert while filming that A.J. Brown was not seen in practice today. So in all likelihood, A.J. Brown, he's not going to play. That makes Devonta Smith immediately a must start. And Jahan Dotson, likely flexible this week. I would say Jahan Dotson is flexible. Not as flexible as Drake London. definitely not as flexible. Like, you play Drake London over Jahan Dotson because of importance to the offense, I think. But Devonta Smith is without question a great must start, and Jahan Dotson is a great flex option. I do think in like 12-team leagues or 14-team leagues. And Darnell Mooney's knocking on the door of flexible, but he's not there yet for me. So let me know how your team looks so far this week. And if you want to see the top 30 wide receiver rankings and where all these guys rank this week, click on this video right here.